Hello, welcome to Watch This Now. My name is Nick, and today we're talking about Dr. Sleep, hitting theaters this weekend because for some reason it was not released for Halloween. Why? You tell me. This is the sequel to The Shining, but more importantly, it is the adaptation of Stephen King's 2013 novel. Like a lot of movies that I am seeing recently, there is a lot to unpack with this one. Not only is the story large scale and surrounding three characters whose paths converge, it's also the product of three very talented creators coming together. Back in 1977, Stephen King's original novel, The Shining, was published and was quite successful. Just 3 years later, film auteur Stanley Kubrick released his film adaptation of The Shining, which was initially panned by critics and pretty disregarded overall. But you probably already know that it has become one of the most iconic horror films of all time, if not the most iconic horror film. But one of the biggest critics of the film was the author Stephen King himself. Most horror fans know he famously hates that movie. He thinks it's a horrible adaptation and hates what Kubrick done with his work. Now that's a whole series of videos talking about the difference between the novel and that, but that's a whole different movie. So what I find really interesting is that King actually revisited the material to write the novel Dr. Sleep, once he was asked by a fan whatever happens to Dan Torrance after the events of the Overlook Hotel. Well, Dr. Sleep answers that question, and boy is it quite an answer. Now this is my opportunity to admit, no, I have not read Dr. Sleep. I have read The Shining, and I started to read Dr. Sleep, but I am such a bad reader, I barely made it to page 100 before this movie was released, so that's on me. But I'm really looking forward to finishing it now that I've seen the film. Dr. Sleep follows adult Dan Torrance, here played by Ewan McGregor, who starts out basically at rock bottom. He seems a lot more like his villainous father from The Shining than the quiet kid that we were familiar with. He is a selfish, careless drunk who really has no prospects for him in his future. So he does start trying to turn things around with a little help after going to a new town. He starts to form a new life. And as that is happening, we are introduced to Rose the Hat, played by Rebecca Ferguson, who is the leader of this cult of energy vampires. We don't really know what their deal is, but we know that they're terrifying because they suck the shining out of people. They literally absorb that psychic energy and drain the life from them. Mostly children, which makes this a very disturbing watch at times. However, it is highly effective. And we are also introduced to this young girl, Abra, who through The Shining makes a connection with Dan. They begin talking and they form a bond that they will need because Rose and her gang are about to catch on to their scent. Now I have to backtrack just a lot here because the original The Shining film really left a mark on me as a kid. I should not have watched it when I was 6 years old, but you know what? I had a really bad habit of walking into the living room at the wrong times when my brother was watching horror films. And wouldn't you know it, I walked into the room during The Shining, and seriously every iconic horror scene in that film I caught way too young, scarred for life, right? That movie has always terrified me, and I know there are people that think it is hilarious, some think it is stupid, some just think it's a poor adaptation, some think it's a masterpiece. I think it's the scariest film of all time. That is just my opinion, although I understand opinions differ. The idea of taking all of that classic horror imagery and then bringing it back, infusing it with Stephen King's sequel novel, and bridging this big gap and bringing it all together, huge task, and I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this once I initially saw the trailers. I was excited at first, and it actually fooled me, and I thought that they were just using the original footage from The Shining until I got so excited that I rewatched the trailer a few times, and I caught it on second watch that these scenes were refilmed. And I have to say, I think the weakest selling point of this film is taking it as a sequel to The Shining. If that is what you are thinking going into this film, as I know it has heavily been marketed as, it just really isn't that. The story is so very focused on these three different characters and how they come together with those elements of The Shining worked in, and I think they are worked in quite well towards the end, as you've probably seen way too much imagery of in the marketing. But I know that that was different from the actual novel's ending, so it's interesting that this is all coming together, but hey, it is. Now, the novel also had a huge impact on me personally, as Stephen King is, honestly, I'm that basic person. He's my favorite author, and I think The Shining is one of the most terrifying things I have ever read. It is tied with Pet Sematary. They are both the scariest, but I have to tell you, I got to the point in The Shining, reading the book, that I got to this part where Danny goes to room 217, and I stayed up until 4 a.m. finishing that book because I could not sleep until I had finished it and put it behind me. I was like, nope, and that was one of the scariest reads ever. I really want to go back and reread it and savor it, but I was so terrified by that book, I seriously had to finish it in almost one sitting. Then comes Mike Flanagan, who I would say is an up-and-coming director, but no, I would say he is here. He has made some of the best horror recently, some of my favorite horror films of the last decade, with Oculus and Hush, as well as The Haunting of Hill House, a great series on Netflix that even non-horror fans have gotten into. And then you got the fact that he also adapted Gerald's Game, another Stephen King book for Netflix, and that was thought to be impossible to adapt, yet I thought that his film was actually better than the book itself, in my opinion. So if there's anyone to take on this monumental task, it's Mike Flanagan. And I have to say, he does about as good of a job as he possibly could, and I don't think anyone else could have gotten as close as he did. At the very least, this film serves as a bridge of the gap between Kubrick and King, and that divide between the film lovers and novel lovers and everything. This is truly a film made by someone that is clearly a fan of all of it. And the King himself has even stated that he thinks that this film has softened his feelings on the Kubrick film that he has publicly hated for decades. So that alone is good. It doesn't matter what the rest of us think. The King has spoken. This tale is near epic in scope, yet it is also very refined in its structure. And I'm just so glad that Stephen King decided to revisit this material and create this story, because it is wonderfully character focused and so grounded. Even though it has some fantasy horror elements, you really believe everything thanks to these characters that really pull you into the material. Ewan McGregor is great as older Danny. I was thinking, who would be better? Who would I cast? And I was like, yeah, Ewan McGregor. Good call. He is really good in some of the scenes that give him some emotional work to do. He really rises to the occasion and is a real heart of the film. Newcomer Kylie Curran is the young girl Abra, who is very good in this significant role. She does a very good job of keeping things believable. And I really like that there were a lot of little moments where she was just subtle in her performance, and I never felt like this film was telling me, hey, look at this cool new character, you like them. I was constantly like, what's going on with Abra? What's her? Let's get back to her. I want to know more about her story. Easily the best part of the film is Rebecca Ferguson as the villain Rose the Hat. She is despicable and irredeemable, yet also understandable. We spend a lot of time with her twisted cult, the True Knot, and it is time well spent. Ferguson is equally menacing, entrancing, and vulnerable. I kept waiting for there to be a scene that would disappoint me, and I really felt like she gave a perfectly balanced performance throughout. And I really wish that the Academy didn't hate on horror so much, because I really think that she should honestly be in the conversation for Best Supporting Actress. Even just a nomination, I wouldn't say a win, but I think she could break into the nominations, because her performance truly is exactly what it needs to be. She hits all the right notes consistently throughout, a pretty interesting arc for her character. Dr. Sleep is a lot of movie, and it happens to be weakened by the same problems that befall a lot of Stephen King adaptations. And it's just kind of what happens when you have so much material that you're trying to cram into such a short amount of time in a different medium. You just lose things along the way, and unfortunately you just don't get to spend enough time in the headspace of these characters to make a lot of motivations work. And I'm talking about that for like a lot of Stephen King adaptations. Here there is so much good stuff. I think we do get a lot of the right things conveyed, but in terms of just switching things to a film, I just felt like that there was more that could have been refined. Like all of the stuff about how Dan gets the moniker Dr. Sleep, really good, and I liked it as far as the story and what I would like to be reading about in a book. However, as a film, I felt like it could have easily just been cut. I feel like you could have just made his entire arc overcoming alcoholism, and that would have worked in terms of the film. I understand sticklers for the material that really want to see that on screen. I would too, I'm sure, if I'd read the book, but I also think if we're making changes and we're making more of a movie, that's just, you have to make that sacrifice. And in saying that as well, I also have to say that I think Mike Flanagan really works well as far as making grounded characters and centering them and making you care about them so that when horrific things happen, you care about the characters, because without that, none of the horror matters. However, here I just felt like, again, if you're just gonna make the sequel to The Shining and you want to use those original elements, this film could have been a lot scarier. I was not scared. There were parts where the score got me, and some familiar imagery flickered those terrors from childhood, but nothing genuinely scared me. And this film doesn't need to be scary, to be perfectly honest, but I think it would have been much more enhanced if it was. It probably would have been an entire extra grade up for me if it was, and I think Mike Flanagan is just so good at horror. There are scenes, especially earlier on in the film, that really get me because I'm just like, ooh, he so knows how to scare me. And then, once we get to a point of the film where there should just be a barrage of scares, it's really just a barrage of The Shining references. And I'm not going to make the same fan service complaint that I know a lot of other people are, because for me, I didn't get that. It just felt like, here's all The Shining, like, it was just all at once, and it wasn't utilized in a way that actually scared me, and I think that there were plenty of opportunities to be genuinely scary. And instead, Flanagan kind of weakens the material with some stuff that just doesn't need to be there, but I don't want to get spoilery, so that's that. This is overall a really good film, and I don't know, I'm wrestling with it. I don't know if I want to go see it again. I kind of want to go see it again. Maybe I don't, because there are always so many things to see, but I kind of want to see this again. I'm going to give Dr. Sleep a 3.5 out of 5. It is really solidly well made and a very interesting story with very great characters performed by very talented actors. However, this is not going to be for everyone, so do your research before heading into this one, although I definitely think it is worth a watch. It is unique and interesting, and even though it is an adaptation of a novel that is also a sequel to an iconic film, it does feel like one of the most original things I've seen all year, and for that alone, I think it's worth the price of admission. Also, like I said, Mike Flanagan, he is one of the faces of the future of horror. I think he has so many great things lined up for him. This is, I think, his real mark. Like, Gerald's Game was great and it hit hard, but I think this should be his hit that makes him an actual name, because the horror community were in love with him, but he really deserves some more attention. I mean, he got this gig because he met to talk about a DC film, so that would have been interesting, but I really would like to see what he has going for him next. And I also know that there is going to be a 3-hour-long director's cut, so that's an additional 30 minutes of footage, and I guess whatever home release director's cut comes, so that should be really interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Thank you so much for watching this video. I greatly appreciate you sticking out for a long one. It's a long movie, there's a lot to talk about. It's Stephen King. Thank you so much. Like this video, subscribe to watch this now. Look out for all future reviews and other videos. You let me know in the comments below what you want to see, and I'll see you in my next video.